Several years ago, with the onset of spring, I was suddenly overcome by an incomprehensible depression. Usually my soul joyfully rejoiced even in the March sun and raindrops, but at that time it was cold and gloomy. Maybe because I'm already old. My wife and I have been divorced for a long time and live separately. But I see my teenage son without any problems. And with the wife herself, one might say, easy, friendly relations have been preserved. But without my family home, it was still somehow lonely. Maybe this played a role in the onset of my apathy, or maybe spring vitamin deficiency provoked spring blues. What is important is not this, but the fact that I was suddenly drawn to take a walk among the graves. And then one April Saturday, I went to the First City Cemetery. I used to have a dislike for this evil place, since it was associated with irreparable grief and the fear of oblivion. But this time, I went there with a calm heart. The morning was sunny and unseasonably hot. Young people were already walking around the city in t-shirts, but for now I still wear a light jacket, and so he went alone to visit the dead. However, at the cemetery gates, an alarming chill ran through me again, but I stepped over them. There were no graves of any of my deceased relatives buried in the second cemetery, and I just went for a walk along the broken asphalt road. To my left, I noticed a grave overgrown with grass, which was not even fenced. She was just standing right next to the road. A lead-colored metal cross rose above it, but there was no monument, not even a funeral photograph indicating the name and surname of the deceased. But there was a small bench nearby, on which I sat down. There were few people around, and I basked in the sun thoughtfully. And suddenly, the words sounded in my head. "I came. Why don't you even say hello?" And I suddenly answered this question in the same mental way. "So, I just came here. No one." At first, there was a pause, and then the thought again appeared in my mind. "Are you in a hurry to join us? This means that the juice in you has not yet dried up for the dead earth to accept. In 10 years, they will bring you. But today you will see someone else on the road." After that, everything went silent in my head. I also thought that I had already started talking to myself. Then she sat a little longer and went back. Already in the city, I heard behind me the roar of the siren of a traffic police car, which stopped in front of me right on the roadway. And then I noticed a man lying on the road. A little further away stood a black Toyota with its flashing lights on. Apparently a pedestrian had just been hit. I did not go up to the scene of the accident to take a half glance at this terrible sight, as gape onlookers do, but continued on my way home. From behind, you could see the roar of another siren. A yellow resuscitation vehicle was rushing to the scene, but they didn't have time to save the man. I read in the city internet news in the evening that pedestrian died. Maybe it was just a coincidence, this accident, and the thought that came into my head at the cemetery that I would see someone else on the road today. Or maybe the dead man mentally explained something to me. My partner and I have a small freight transportation company. To save money, we do not hire a driver, but transport the cargo ourselves by car. The work is as simple as shelling pears. Load the shipment in the city, bring it to the specified location, mainly to private shops in various villages, unload it, and return to the base. There is a lot of work. We work as hard as we can. Sometimes we have to earn money until midnight. On one of these nights, this amazing incident happened to us. Me and my companion Sam, were returning from a holiday village. We were both tired during the day and were in a hurry to get home. So we decided to take a shortcut, which was by no means in our rules. We always drove past one of the villages along the ring road. We had to take a hefty detour, but we always made it. There was a legend among drivers that it was better not to drive past the old cemetery outside the village. It would cost you more, and even more so at night. This place is not good. Any driver can tell you. We were never interested in what exactly was bad about it, but we followed a long-standing driving tradition. We drove around the cemetery even in daylight. But here we decided to take a risk. to drive past it after midnight. In general, we are going. There is not a soul around, not a breeze, as they say, silence, and the dead stand with sighs. The cemetery is like a cemetery, old, with rickety crosses. The naked eye can see that no one has been buried here for a long time. It's creepy in my soul, something is scratching. And suddenly we see a girl standing on the side of the road. Very young, in a short miniskirt and a transparent blouse. She saw us and raised her hand to vote. And my companion was sitting behind the wheel. He's a single guy with a penchant for beauties, so he just put the brakes on. It's scary for us in the car, he says, but how can she walk home past such a place? We need a ride. The girl climbed into our car and let's chat. Allegedly, she is walking home from the disco, tired, exhausted, and here is our car. He sits next to me and chirps, and bats his eyes, and pouts his lips, but I feel uneasy. Sometimes a young girl smells strangely stinking, like coming from an old grave, and her eyes are not young, dark green, like water in an old well, cunning, unkind. And where did it come from here? The nearest club where young people gather is no less than 50 kilometers away. She didn't walk all this way in high-heeled shoes. The girl looks really fresh, and none of the locals will go through the cemetery. Thinking this way, I accidentally glanced at the girl's reflection in the side mirror and almost went crazy. Next to me sat an old woman in a white shroud, disgusting, half-decayed, as if she had just crawled out of the grave. Only her eyes were the same, dark green, like swamp lights. I screamed and pushed the girl out of the cabin. Sam almost lost his mind. "What are you doing?" shouts. And the girl hung on the doorknob like a bulldog, wouldn't let go, stared at me with her green eyes, and was silent. And suddenly I see, not just a girl hanging from a hand, but as if floating after us through the air, and you can't understand. Either a person or some kind of ghost. And a minute later the girl was gone. An old woman in a white shroud was hanging next to me, reaching out to me, looking straight into my eyes, and neither I nor Sam could take our eyes off her. We try to scream. The voice has disappeared. Sam tries to increase the speed. His legs don't obey. The car's headlights went out on their own. So we drive, with the door open, in the dark, and outside the windows on one side there is a forest, and on the other there are old graves. The old woman reaches out to me, tries to grab my sweater, but I can't move. I look into her eyes. Finally, I found the strength. I hit the old woman on the fingers with a tire iron and slammed the door. Well, I think it passed. Nothing of the kind. The old woman hung outside our window for a long time, still trying to force us to look into her eyes again. And the worst thing is, not a sound. Even the night grasshoppers are silent. Only the car engine growls. I don't remember when the old woman detached herself from us. It seems not far from the village. In any case, our headlights then turned on. Without saying a word to each other, we rushed home along the usual route, without turning onto any more country roads. We prayed to God all the way, although we had never really believed in Him before. We arrived home safely, and since then, we have tried never to travel at night, much less on unfamiliar routes. This happened in the 70s of the last century, in the middle or at the end, I don't remember. I only remember that the funeral I attended was far from the first in my life. Accordingly, the deceased was not the first or even the second. I don't know why, but when I was a child, it was considered absolutely normal to take your children with you to funerals, especially the village ones. In general, everything has always been different in the village. It has its own customs and traditions. For example, when we came to visit my grandmother, my great-grandmother, the first thing my mother did was roll up her sleeves and tuck up her skirt, making it shorter, and went to wash the floors in the hut. This is how they came to the funeral with their children, preserving the traditions, and as if saying, "Look, we have come to you with the whole family, as a sign of our deepest respect for the deceased. That summer, an elderly man died on the edge of the village. All the neighbors came to say goodbye to him. Our turn has come. Mom took me by the hand and led me to the dead man's house. When we entered, I immediately felt the unusualness of the funeral ceremony, but I realized what this unusual thing was only a few minutes later. The fact is that in the village it was customary to vocalize for the deceased. For this purpose, they often even invited special old women weepers. But at this farewell to the deceased it was quiet. No one suffered or groaned. People stood in complete silence. The second oddity was that those present were at some distance from the coffin. There was not a single person next to it. Why are the villagers silent in the distance? Who is this strange dead man? I stood on tiptoe and tried to look at him. What I saw shocked me. The body lying in the coffin was shaken by small tremors. At least it seemed so to me. Then, looking closer, I realized that it was more likely not a trembling, but something like waves that rolled back and forth throughout the body of the deceased. This created the impression that the dead man was moving, and constantly, without stopping for a second. I was scared, but I really wanted to understand what kind of waves these were, and curiosity overcame fear. I unhooked my hand from my mother's and took a few steps forward. At that same second, several people grabbed me from behind, by the shoulders, by the dress, by the neck, even by the hair, and pulled me away from the coffin, returning me to my place. But I still managed to see what kind of waves they were. Hundreds. No, thousands. Yes, thousands of some small gray creatures swarmed all over the surface of the dead man's body. They moved chaotically back and forth, and this created the illusion of continuous waves. I looked at my mother. She stood there, nervously biting her lips, and real horror froze in her eyes. This was the first time I saw my mother like this, so I couldn't think of anything better than to burst into tears loudly. Mom quietly apologized and took me out of the deceased's house. On the street she scolded me, but not angrily, but rather for show. Look, the child did something wrong and got a scolding. I was not at all offended, because I felt that my mother left the house of the creepy dead man with great relief. Fortunately, we didn't go to the cemetery. And in the evening I heard my grandmother telling what we missed. Mom asked her, "Was he buried like that?" "Well, right along with these." "Yes," answered the grandmother. "We invited 2 men from a neighboring village. None of ours dared to approach the deceased, even for a decent reward and a liter of moonshine. They covered the coffin of the deceased with a lid and immediately nailed it down, along with these evil spirits. Much later, my mother told me about that dead man. It turned out that he was a real village sorcerer. He lived on the outskirts of the village and had little contact with anyone. And in general, he rarely left the house, at least in his human form. The villagers had no doubt at all that the sorcerer could turn into a big angry dog, and sometimes into a black pig. Mom said that when the sorcerer did go out into the street, everyone immediately ran away, especially the children. And once, while running away, she tripped and fell, and she lay there, with her face buried in the ground, while he passed by. Her grandmother taught her this. Under no circumstances should she look the sorcerer in the eyes. "Otherwise he will take your soul," said the adults. One day I was told that perhaps these were real entities from the lower world. Sorcerers have many assistants, most often devils or demons, but there are also those like those little evil spirits. Devils and demons after the death of the owner, one might say, are inherited to the next sorcerer. But gray entities, the size of a pinhead, often prefer to leave with their owner. Last summer, my friends and I decided to get out of the city in a small group and have a good rest somewhere. In the end, we decided to go to the village. The village is relatively small. There is only one store, and even that one is not always open. You can get to it in several ways. One of them lies through a cornfield, and the other goes along the roadway through the forest. One of the guys had a dacha in this village. We arrived at the place early in the morning, shopped along the way, as expected, and began to buzz to the fullest. It was already getting dark. Some of us had had too much to drink, some had fallen asleep, and some still had a little too much. In general, we decided that we needed to go to the store, and the nearest working one was 3 kilometers away. Of those who were somehow still able to overcome such a route, there were only me and Archie, the owner of the dacha. We didn't risk going by car. We went on foot. We decided to go through the field. However, it was the longest walk of all, and by the time we reached the store, it was already dark. We bought something stronger to make it easier to carry. When they went outside and were smoking before heading back, Archie suggested, "Maybe we can take a shortcut." "How?" "Yes, there is one road here. We'll be back twice as fast." That's what they decided on. Although I didn't really like this idea, what can I do? I was already tired and exhausted, so I was ready for any feat just to get to the dacha as quickly as possible. After 20 minutes of walking through deserted places, Archie stopped. It seems like we got lost. It turned out that my friend had taken me to God knows where. It was night all around. Fortunately, the sky was clear and the moon illuminated the surroundings. "Where have you taken us?" I got angry. "Listen to me, just be quiet, don't shout. The dead don't like to be disturbed," Archie said in a whisper. "Dead? What are you talking about anyway?" I wanted to take a shortcut through the forest, but apparently at the fork I turned the wrong way. "Now we are in the cemetery." "Hush, they're already close. Don't turn around." I fell silent. I wanted to run away from this place, and suddenly on Archie's face, I saw a barely noticeable smile, which a second later turned into uncontrollable laughter. "Very funny, idiot," I muttered. "You should have seen your face." He was writhing with laughter. We moved on. After some time, Archie stopped again. "Are you lost again?" I asked sarcastically. Archie didn't answer, then said in a whisper, "Look." He pointed his finger towards the forest. At first I didn't understand what was going on, but looking closer, I saw a barely noticeable silhouette about 30 meters from us. It seemed like it was a man standing with his back to us, but something was wrong about him. He even stood somehow strangely. I got chills. I don't know how long we stood until I regained the power of speech. "Well, let's go. How long can we wait?" I whispered to Archie. Archie didn't answer, then suddenly turned around and shouted, "Run after me." He ran. I was about to rush after him, but then out of the corner of my eye, I caught something that made the hair on my head stand on end. This creature turned to face me, and the first thing I saw were his huge black eyes. The silhouette moved towards me. He was approaching, and with each step I became colder and colder. I could not move. My heart sank. My legs became wooden. It was as if I was paralyzed. Just when I thought I was done for, Archie grabbed my arm. I came to my senses, and we ran forward, no matter where, as long as we were away from this creature. They returned to the village late at night. I completely lost track of time, and don't know how long we wandered in that terrible place. So I still don't know what kind of creature it was.